So today we're talking to Alex Laurie. And Alex, I know you do a lot of things in the cooperative sector, but I wanted to talk to you specifically about your attempts to launch a cooperative railway line and also lightweight community transport. Let's start with GoOp, which is
Sure.
the co-op railway line. I noticed you've got a Wikipedia page, so
Do you know, I don't think I've ever looked at it.
it's real, so you've got to do it now. So where did the idea come from?
Well, um, that's a very good question. I can remember the first inklings of this was way back in the 1990s when I was living in Leeds, and looking at the rail network there and thinking, well, it's all very well, but surely there's more that could be done here. Surely there are extra connections that could be added. Surely these lines that all radiate outwards could be complemented by radial routes that cut across. I thought, surely it can't be beyond the wit of everyone, and surely some innovator couldn't add these new routes. And indeed, I was quite impressed with some friends of mine in Huddersfield Green Party, who, as a fundraising tool, had started running charter trains to the Edinburgh Festival from various stops in West Yorkshire. And I was stunned to discover that a bunch of people, no different to myself, well, I say no different to myself, they did have an ex-Network Rail employee among their number. They could simply turn up, say, yeah, we'd like to book a train to run on this day from here to here, and we'll sell the tickets, and if we can turn a profit, and we make a bit of money on it. And they ran it as a fundraiser, and it was enormously successful. And I was hugely impressed with that. And so this sort of planted a seed, I guess, though at that stage I wasn't even close to thinking about trying to do it myself. And then I moved to Somerset. I got more involved in cooperative development, and we were living in Yeovil. Now, Yeovil is a large and fast-growing town in Somerset, but it has an extremely unhelpful layout of tracks, coupled with a very limited service, which never sticks to regular clock-based times. Little has changed in the 15 years since I was living there. And I began to think someone ought to organise some additional rail services. And I could see that you could take trains from the West Country all the way through the West Midlands simply by using existing track. No need to lay any additional track. And I thought, the problem with this blasted country is that everything's assumed to be about getting to London. Mm. And we don't build our road network on that basis. Everyone accepts that the roads are going to be able to take us from one place to another place, and not by going to London and then changing direction and going back out of London again. Why on earth do we apply that logic to rail?
But there used to be a lot of cross-rail. There used to be a lot of cross-country rail, didn't there?
Well, certainly there were more lines and there were more opportunities, but they tended to be, there was a big distinction between slow services and express services, and the express services have always favoured London. I mean, the exceptions, of course, are the cross-country network, which has always been a separate franchise in its own right. And without that, it really would be. But the statistic that lodged in my mind was 70% of all rail journeys begin or end in London. I'm not sure if that's current, by the way. That's probably, people have been bandying that around for years and years and years. It must presumably be changing over time. But
70%.
It's in that ballpark. And people always use that statistic to say, well, there you go. London is the only place people really want to travel to. If you want to make money on the rail network, you've got to have a route to London. And I took exactly the opposite conclusion from it. I said, well, what you're telling me is that the routes into London are saturated. That bit of the market is satisfied. It's all the other market sectors, all the routes other than trips into London, where there is demand that no one is meeting. Why don't we meet it? And I think the last piece of the jigsaw was in 2000. The great cooperative thinker Jim Brown published Cooperative Capital. And this was before the big boom in community shares. It was when co-ops raising investment directly from social investors was still an extremely unusual thing to do. And he published a very detailed study of how it could be done, what kind of rights these non-user members could be given, and he opened up the possibility that even very capital-intensive enterprises, which had previously been assumed to be, something co-ops couldn't really consider, could in fact be taken on by mutual organisations following co-op principles. And I put it all together, and I started thinking, we could do this. We could form a co-op that ran rail services. Oh, Hull Trains. I was also keeping an eye on Hull Trains, who were one of the most prominent open access operators in the country. And I thought, well,
what's that one?
Hull Trains.
Oh, Hull, as in the town Hull.
Oh, absolutely. Basically, a group of business people in Hull noticed that there were no direct services from this major northern city to get where else? London. And so they organised, I think, a sort of once every 2 hour express service from Hull down to London, and it was very successful.
When you say open access, what do you mean?
Right, okay, so I have to make the distinction between open access and franchise services. So most services on the railway network since rail privatisation in 1992 have been franchises. The government has split all the major routes that exist in the country into a set of blocks. Typically, they are regional franchises. So you have Great Western covering the Cornish Peninsula. You have London Midland going up to Birmingham. You have the Northern franchise. You have the Southwestern, Southern franchises. When you look at a map of the rail franchises, with the exception of ScotRail, Northern, Cross Country, what you see is a group of wedges all radiating out from London. And each franchise has got one London station, so GWR get Paddington, for example, and then they get all the chunks of track that emanate out from that station all the way to, in GWR's case, Penzance. And and that way, virtually all the established routes on the railway were allocated franchises. The franchises were auctioned, and the highest bidder got to run them. Or in the case of GWR, which is a heavily subsidised franchise, the bidder requiring the least subsidy got to run it. Now, the 1992 privatisation act always left open the possibility that some rail services would be needed that didn't appear in any franchise. The Rail Privatisation Act always allowed for the possibility that new rail services might be introduced outside of these franchises, simply by entrepreneurs developing their own routes and making the case for them, finding space on the timetable and starting to operate. Because the government wanted to ensure it could raise as much money as possible from the franchises, it obviously had an interest in protecting franchisees from competition. And so there was all sorts of restrictions around this. But over time, the restrictions were gradually reduced. But for some reason, open access rail never really took off. Even today, I think 0.1% of all rail journeys in the UK are open access. The others are all done through franchises. It's a pathetic, minuscule quantity. And over time, unease has grown in the regulator, the Office of Rail and Road, which is charged with ensuring competition on the railways. Unease has grown that the railways might just not be a very competitive marketplace. Astonishing conclusion, I know, but so we are turning up and saying, well, okay, you say you want competition on the railways, we will put you to the test. We would like to compete, please. And we've got a perfectly sensible idea, and we'll, work out a good timetable, check that it's feasible, start running trains. What could possibly be wrong with that? On a number of occasions, I've been warned by people that the railways are the third most heavily regulated section of the economy after, I think it's air travel and nuclear power stations.
Right.
Boy, if I'd known what I was taking on, I probably would have reconsidered.
So do you think the regulators are on side, or do you think they're against what you're trying to do, or would they like to help if they could? Or
the only way I can put it is they are conflicted. They do genuinely want competition on the railways, They do genuinely want innovation. They do genuinely want people bringing forward new ideas. But at the same time, another part of their remit is to ensure that the railways are safe and that the railways are reliable. As soon as you can imagine, it's not difficult to realise that the more trains that operate on a railway, the more risks there are, and the more difficult it is to stick to a regular timetable. So when you think about it, a perfectly safe railway and a perfectly reliable railway is one in which no trains actually run at all.
Yeah.
So there is always this balancing act. They have to try and figure out a way in which they can set good standards of safety and reliability, but at the same time allow a little bit of openness to innovation and complexity and new ideas. And I have to say, I'm conflicted myself. I mean, I am lost in admiration of the safety track record of Britain's railways. It is exceptional how many miles people travel without getting hurt. Really quite remarkable. And, do I want to compromise on that? I don't really. But at the back of my mind, I'm thinking to myself, if we put forward a proposal and it is stymied because the safety precautions we have to take make it either unfeasible or too expensive, what's the alternative? What's the counterfactual? Well, the answer is people travel on the roads. Now, I just imagine going to the ORR and saying, got this great idea for a new rail service. Firstly, we're not going to have one or two trains every hour. We're going to have lots and lots of little ones. And they're not going to be driven by professional drivers. If folk can drive the trains themselves, the passengers will just sort of get together, decide who's the best train driver on board, and they can take over driving the trains. And there won't be a timetable. They'll just launch out onto the tracks as and when. And, some of the trains will be going really fast, some of them will go much, much slower, but they'll just wiggle around each other as best they can. Obviously, the regulator would go, that's insanely unsafe, and yet that describes a motorway. Yeah. So if the high standards of safety make it difficult or impossible for new rail services to be introduced that will tempt people out of their cars, then what will happen is they're exposed to the much greater risks on the road network. Yeah. So again, there is a balance that has to be struck here.
That's a really, really interesting point, isn't it? If they really, really, really are concerned about people's safety, they really have to try and get people off the roads.
Absolutely. Risk analysis. Risk analysis is presents itself as a sort of a quasi-scientific method, but it starts with an assumption that you've drawn a boundary and that you are only concerned with risks within that boundary. And yet the reality is that the boundaries are permeable. People move in and out of the area that you're concerned with, and the decisions you take within that boundary determine how many people drift out of it into other areas that you haven't considered. So, that has to be part of a risk analysis, is what will people do if we don't let this service go ahead? Yeah.
So is it only one route that you're looking at?
Right, okay, so the route. Right from the get-go, I had two sort of big ideas. Big idea number one was that Yeovil was on a little branch line, which actually, did connect up some quite important lines, but there just weren't enough trains on that branch line, that we should be making some use of that branch line. The second thing I had was that at Westbury, if you don't want to go into London, there is a little cut-through, a little back route through the town of Melksham. And at the time we started this, Melksham had 2 trains a day. It was pathetic. They had a station there, and they had what's called a parliamentary service. It was so small as to be useless, but it would require an act of parliament to remove it altogether, and no one wanted to do that, and so they kept minimum service going that was no use to anybody. And we thought, well, blimey, we start at Yeovil, go up through Melksham, carry on to the West Midlands maybe. That will be a really clever route, and it will be of enormous benefit for people in Melksham and Yeovil.
And how did you know the demand was there?
Only because we were living in the area. And we were the demand. We were standing on station platforms thinking, oh, this is ridiculous. If I don't catch this train, there isn't another one for an hour and a half.
Right.
So, we were the demand. That was how we knew. Which is not scientific, quite intuitive, but, based in reality, I think. but yeah, this was the process that we had to go through. Having got a sort of very vague idea, we knew that there needed to be some really detailed analysis of, demand actually quantified. And I started to realise that actually planning a rail service could be a little bit like planning and financing wind farms. And wind farms had been enormously successful in the cooperative field, because although you don't know exactly how hard the wind is going to blow on any particular day, averaged out over a year, you can make a pretty fair guess. And it's much the same with the flow of rail passengers. Sure, you don't know whether there's going to be a hen party turning up mob-handed tomorrow at the station, but averaged out over a year, the pattern is pretty consistent and predictable. And you can make some fairly sensible calculations as to, if we reduce the travel time on this route by this much, if we increase the frequency of services by this much, we can predict with a fair degree of accuracy what the effect will be on passenger numbers. And assuming that our fares are comparable with other operators, we can make it an equally robust assumption about how much money we'll generate. Job done. And so that's what we set out to do. And so our first fundraising was what you might call seed corn investment, to try and get enough money just to carry out some basic feasibility studies. And we did all that in 2010, I believe. Now, at this point, I have to own up to a mistake. And my God, I must have known it was a mistake at the time. I think I've been advising people even then not to do this. The temptation when you're starting a new enterprise is to try and do everything. To bring out every bright idea you've ever had and try and put it all under this one umbrella, rather than focusing on the most promising of the ideas and just making damn sure that works. And so we flirted with light rail, we flirted with car clubs, we wondered about bus routes, we put resources and time and energy into all sorts of different side projects. And it did detract from our work on the mainline rail project. And that was, in retrospect, a mistake. We also made the mistake of hiring a CEO too soon. I mean, clearly, this operation was always going to need someone quite skilled. And we made a hire based on someone who had experience not in the mainstream rail industry, but on an independent heritage railway. And we thought that was quite a good sort of connection to make, because they were coming in from the outside, so frankly they were cheaper, but they did have genuine rail experience. It was a mistake. We blew loads of money on the guy who, with the best will in the world, could not take us very far forward at that time. And so we burned up our resources too quickly, and that created all sorts of problems further down the road. At first, we thought we'd got a pretty clear mechanism. We went to Network Rail, we explained what we wanted to do. They said, yes, there is a process for open access operators. Here's what you have to do, step by step. Off you go. And we thought, well, this is going to be easy. But the further we got into it, the more problematic it became. What you have to do in order to get a rail service off the ground is you have to have the rolling stock, the actual trains available to you and at the time that you need them.
When you say available, do you have to buy trains?
Good God, no. No, that really would be a challenge. No, although you can buy trains if you want to, that's incredibly capital intensive. Much more likely is that you lease trains.
Right.
Effectively, the rolling stock leasing organisations are all various varieties of banks, really, and they lease out the rolling stock as assets. And
right, so the maintenance of the trains and the carriages is nothing to do with you.
That's right. Yes. They retain the responsibility for most of the big maintenance tasks, and so we've got a fairly predictable leasing payment every single month. But the fact is, at the time that we were doing this, and it's still pretty much the case now, there was a terrible shortage of rolling stock. People were still using stuff that was 30, 40 years old. There were never enough carriages. There had been this period of about 15 years with continual increases in rail passenger numbers, and new rolling stock just had not been provided fast enough to keep up with it. So there was a terrible shortage. So the first problem we had was, did anybody have rolling stock suitable? And we needed pretty odd rolling stock. On the one hand, we were going to be crawling through small stations on branch lines like Yeovil and Melksham, And then within a few minutes of that, we'd be hammering along the high-speed express line between Swindon and Didcot, trying to get up to 100 miles an hour. So it wasn't just that we couldn't find any rolling stock, it was that we had to have very particular types of rolling stock. And then when you add to that the fact that really we wanted to be a super-duper ultra-eco, best-in-class environmental performance, we made life very difficult for us. So problem number one, can we get hold of rolling stock? Problem number two, we had to have a demand forecast that we could rely upon, that investors could rely upon, that the Office of Rail and Road could see was introducing new passengers to the network and not simply poaching passengers from other operators. And that would be up to date and current. And the third problem was we had to have a timetable that had been checked against the existing Network Rail timetable, and there was definitely room for us on the railway. All these things had to be ready at the same time. If you had to wait, the chances were that by the time the third element turned up, one of the other two elements would have gone out of date. And we have been struggling with that for the better part of a decade. It's a bloody nightmare, I tell you.
And where are you at now? I mean, when might I be able to catch a cooperative train?
Let's bring this up to date. And I should say that in 35 minutes, I have a conference call booked with Dan Fredrickson of Network Rail. So I've got to actually get back to the coalface then.
Right, okay.
So we think we've solved the rolling stock problem. Porterbrook, one of the biggest rail leasing companies, have developed a new version of their old electric multiple units. They realise that there are now, the UK network is really bitty. Some parts of it are electrified, some parts of it aren't. You want to use electric power whenever you can, not just for environmental reasons, but for performance reasons too. But large chunks of the network just aren't electrified. And so Porterbrook realised that if they refurbished their old 319s, gave them a new diesel power plant, but kept the electric capability, they would have trains that could go anywhere, do anything. And they're called Class 769s. They are pretty fast, not quite as fast as I'd like, but pretty fast, and come in 4-unit configurations, which is, you know, plenty of seating. Hopefully we can get them reasonably full, though it's perhaps a little bit larger than we would really have liked. So there we get 769. And they are, you know, for the time being at least, they're available to us. We can place an order, we can have them delivered on time, that'll work. So we think we've got the rolling stock more or less taped. Then we have the demand forecast. It's gone out of date. We're going to have to replace the demand forecast. We can't replace the demand forecast until we've got an up-to-date timetable. The up-to-date timetable has been held up because Network Rail is insisting on sectional run times. That is
caught in a sort of catch-22 situation and...
Well, what Network Rail is saying is that we have got newish rolling stock operating on a route that it's never operated on before. We need to prove exactly how fast, and I mean exactly, these trains are going to run over the different sections of our route, taking into account gradients, slowing down for stations, the line speed around various points, signalling. Oh my God, we spent 3 days talking about one bridge just outside Didcot where the bridge is so low over the tracks that the wires come down too steeply, and so you have to lower the pantograph to go under the bridge, then raise the pantograph afterwards in order to keep up your speed. Oh my God.
Sounds fiendishly complicated.
Oh, you would not believe. So, I think, however, one of the interesting things was that at the same time as we're doing all this, GWR are trying to increase the number of trains they're operating. They are, the government has asked them to provide more services to South Wales, and that means they're increasing the number of trains going between Swindon and Didcot. And that is going to use up very limited capacity there, particularly because we're not quite as fast as we ought to be, and so we take longer to get over that section. So that's a huge problem for us. Now, one of the things that's been bedeviling our project is that, you know, you'll have noticed over the years, the rail industry makes the news from time to time, and not in a good way. So we had the franchising calamity, when Virgin challenged the award of a franchise, won in court, but the government had to admit the entire franchising process was a complete disaster. that stopped new franchises being issued, which drastically reduced demand for new rolling stock and meant that the rolling stock that we were after suddenly became unavailable. That caused a huge problem. Then, more recently, we've had all the disruption on Southern Rail, all the arguments about driver-only operation. We've had this calamity last year when Network Rail, when the operators tried to introduce new timetables, and Network Rail simply broke under the strain. And for weeks, there was chaos on the railways as trains simply failed to turn up when they were meant to, and they just didn't have enough drivers who were familiar with the new routes, and it was appalling. They are still recovering from that. Interestingly, that has had the effect of preventing GWR from introducing its new timetable. And we are now, perhaps, possibly, a little ahead of them, which is astonishing to me. And
so just to push you, when do you think we might see some cooperative trains running?
Well, this is why I'm having a conversation with Dan this morning. My hope is that we can operate in December 19. That's our target. But we have two big problems. Firstly, although we've now got these sectional run times prepared, I've only just been told that before they can be submitted to the assurance, before they can be submitted to the timetabling process for consultation, they have to be assured by Network Rail, which basically means Network Rail have to redo the work that our consultants have done. And I've just been told that there has to be a wait of a month before that can happen. And during that wait, we miss a deadline. So that's absolutely causing me to tear my hair out, because they have known for months that we were preparing these SRTs. They could totally have been ready to assure them in time for this deadline, but they weren't.
But it's not a million years away. It could be 2019, 2020, something like that.
Worst case scenario is we're pushed back to May 2020. Now, in May 2020...
That's the worst case scenario, okay.
In May 2020, well, it's pretty bad, because in May 2020, we would once again be up against GWR trying to get their extra services onto the grid. And so once again, we have this huge tussle for capacity.
So how can people help you? You're looking for investors? What are you looking for? How can people help?
That is such a difficult question to answer. We are running very short on money, so investment is an issue. But I've got to say, investment, you should think of it as a donation. It's that high risk. So yeah, we would like money. We would be able to proceed much better and much more reliably if we had more money. But can we say to people that it's an investment that is secure? No, absolutely not. It's crazy high risk, much more high risk than any other community share issue. And for that reason, while we're very happy to accept money and issue shares, people have got to understand that they should think of it as they would a donation. So, that would help, no question about it.
It's a very exciting project, isn't it? It's a very exciting idea to think of cooperatising the rail network. It's a really
yeah. It is, and I'm so frustrated that if I had known now, if I'd known back then what I know now, I could have done a much better job of it. It's so frustrating that we made so many mistakes in the early stages and lost so much time. And now here we are. We know what we're doing.
We've got much time. Sorry, Alex. Sorry.
Yeah. So,
we haven't got much time. What's your ambition? What's your best case scenario?
Okay, yeah. Best case scenario is that we bring forward a timetable that we can see is going to make money. Did I say operating in December 19? I should have said on the December 19 timetable, but I think we would actually start operations in 2020, maybe January, February. We have to train a bunch of new drivers. We can't even start training drivers until we've been awarded a track access contract, and that can't happen until the new year. So that's kind of the best case scenario now. It's I think we're assembling pieces of the jigsaw. The runtimes report that we have now is a very important step forward. The rolling stock is really good to have in the bag. But unless we can actually find a timetable that Network Rail are prepared to accept in terms of capacity, we are still stymied just as before. And that has not happened yet. So, yeah, still work to do.
Sounds like really, really hard work. So, Jeremy Corbyn.
And everyone in Co-op is now working on this unpaid. There is simply no funding to pay anyone for their time, so it's just I have to squeeze it into my spare time as best I can. I mean, that is not great.
So if it works, it's going to be a magnificent achievement. Jeremy Corbyn has talked about renationalising the railways. What would that mean for a cooperative? Surely he wouldn't nationalise a co-op.
Well, renationalisation could mean two things. It could mean taking the franchises back into direct state control, and open access is unaffected. It could mean that he thinks the government should have a monopoly on running train services. I don't think that's where they're heading. But the honest truth is that, we've looked at all those pronouncements of the Labour Party and all the things they've said. They don't know that much about rail. That's not a criticism. They have loads of other things to do. They're not rail experts. I don't think most of them are aware of open access rail existing, which, given that it only operates 0.1% of the services, is fair enough. So basically, their aspiration, their big idea, has loads of details still to be worked out, and until they're worked out, we've no real idea of how it will affect us. I'm rather assuming that while they will want to get franchises back under state control, they will not necessarily want the state to have a complete monopoly on rail services. That would be a very big step. I think they might stop short of that. So my suspicion is that the Labour Party's plans don't particularly affect us.
Yeah. I mean, they've said that they want to double the size of the cooperative economy, so nationalising co-ops wouldn't make much sense, would it?
It wouldn't, but, they can only work with what actually exists. When you're up in government, it's a very long-distance view. You can only really see big things, and it's very easy to accidentally squish small things because they're just too small to notice.
Yeah,
and we are too small to notice.
Yeah, I was talking to Duncan McCann at the New Economics Foundation. He's trying to build an alternative to Uber, cooperative alternative to Uber.
Yes.
When he was doing the crowdfunding, they raised the license requirement from £2,500 for a 5-year license to 2.5 million.
Yeah.
And so he had to move out of London, and he talked to the regulators, and they weren't trying to crush him. They just didn't realise he existed.
No, or that anything could exist like that.
Yeah. They were just trying to get more money for the admin costs, extra admin costs that Uber caused.
Yeah. It's the biggest problem with government is that government always says we want innovation, we want openness, we want people to be able to try new things, but then inadvertently take decisions that wipe out an entire level of the business ecosystem in the sector.
Yeah.
And that means that smaller organisations can never build their way up to the higher levels. And it effectively grants a sort of collective monopoly to the organisations that are already in, that are already through the door and have reached a certain stage.
We've only got a few minutes left, so I'll maybe talk to you another time about lightweight community transport, which we haven't touched at all. But we'll talk about that another time.
Yeah. Well, yes. The interesting case study to look at there, I think, is Preston and Preston Trampower, where you have I should say Trampower is not a co-op; it's a private business, and they are trying to introduce a tram completely independently. No particular involvement or support from the municipal authorities. We're trying to help them with it. We're trying to support them with it, and we are hoping that we can introduce an element of community participation by doing that. It's another example of where our country seems to be unable to make these big collective infrastructure decisions, and so the whole thing gets handed to the community sector by default, and the community sector just the scaling up and the resources, the capacity needed to take on these big things is it's a huge challenge. And once again, if we can do it once, we can do it over and over and over again. But doing it the first time, absolute bugger.
Mm. So we've partnered with Open.coop. Oliver Sylvester Bradley. I don't know if you know him.
I don't actually know.
No, and we're going to start a UK mutual credit network, and we've got a Finance Innovation Lab fellowship to help us do it.
Ooh.
I just think it would be so fantastic for people to be able to pay for train tickets with mutual credit. And I'd like to keep in touch with you about your progress. And in fact, if you could give us an expression of interest, and when you start operating, we could get back in touch and we could keep you up to speed. I'll send you a link so you can just
please do, Dave. Please do. I'd be very happy to.
And I'll, if you don't mind, I'll subscribe you to the blog as well, so you can see other interviews and you can see what other people are up to.
I'd be very happy to. That would be great.
All right, brilliant. I'll send you some information about that, and I'll let you get off to talk to National Rail.
Thanks ever so much, Dave.
All right.
Cheers, mate.
Cheers, Alex. I'll speak to you soon.